Welcome to Bedtime Horror, your portal to scary stories. It all started on a regular Wednesday evening, and I was feeling like a superhero, delivering food to hungry folks, one doorstep at a time. Little did I know, this was the night when things would take a crazy twist. I had just picked up a big bag of burgers and fries from Benny's Burgers, and let me tell you, the aroma in my car was driving me nuts. I was on a mission to bring joy, in the form of greasy goodness, to someone's dinner table. My GPS guided me to the address, which was in a quiet neighborhood with dimly lit streets. As I parked my car and grabbed the bag, I noticed something felt off. There were no porch lights on, and the house looked kinda creepy in the dim glow of the street lamp. But hey, I thought maybe they just preferred their privacy. I walked up to the front door, clutching that bag of burgers like it was the Holy Grail. I rang the doorbell, and seconds later, the door creaked open slowly. That's when things started to get seriously weird. A guy, dressed all in black like a ninja, stood there in the shadows, his face obscured by a hoodie. I tried to keep my cool, reminding myself that some people just like their privacy. I handed over the bag, and the guy snatched it from my hands, but instead of saying thanks or anything, he just slammed the door shut without a word. My spidey senses were tingling, but I shrugged it off, thinking maybe he was just having a bad day. But then, as I turned to leave, I heard a strange noise behind me. I glanced back and saw the guy had thrown the door wide open again, and this time, he was holding an empty bag and a scowl that could scare a grizzly bear. He was shouting something, but it was all gibberish to me, like a bunch of words jumbled up in a blender. Before I could react, he lunged at me, grabbing my delivery bag and tossing it inside his house. Panic set in, and I backed away, not sure what to do next. The guy looked angry and confused, and I was standing there, burgerless and bewildered, wondering how my food delivery had turned into something straight out of a movie. So there I was, standing on this stranger's doorstep, my delivery bag held hostage inside his mysterious lair. The guy was still ranting, but his words made as much sense as a unicorn in a grocery store. I decided I had to do something, so I mustered up all the courage I had, which wasn't much, and asked him what he wanted. He just pointed at the bag I'd delivered, still scowling like a grumpy cat. I figured he wanted a refund or something, but how was I supposed to make that happen? I pulled out my phone, trying to access the DoorDash app, but my hands were shaking so much I could barely type. The guy, meanwhile, was getting more agitated by the second. He kept gesturing wildly, like he was performing some kind of bizarre interpretive dance. Finally, I managed to pull up the app and called customer support. I explained the whole crazy situation to the agent, who must have thought I was making up some twisted bedtime story. They promised to handle it, but it felt like hours were passing as I stood there on that doorstep. The guy was still raging, but then, out of nowhere, he grabbed his phone and started yelling into it. I couldn't make out what he was saying, but he seemed furious. It was like a scene from a movie, with me caught in the middle of this bizarre drama. Just when I thought things couldn't get any weirder, a car screeched to a halt in front of the house. Another guy, who looked just as intense as the first one, jumped out and ran up the steps. They started arguing in what sounded like a made-up language, all while I stood there feeling like I'd stumbled into an alternate universe. Finally, the second guy turned to me and yelled, "Give him the food." I was so confused and scared at this point that I just handed over another bag of burgers and fries, hoping it would end this strange encounter. He snatched it from my hands, and they both disappeared into the house, slamming the door shut. I took a step back, my heart pounding like a drum, and then I got a notification on my phone. It was from DoorDash, saying the order had been completed and I could move on to my next delivery. I couldn't believe it. I practically sprinted back to my car, feeling like I'd just escaped from a real-life Twilight Zone episode. It was a dark and chilly night when I accepted the DoorDash order. The address seemed unfamiliar, but it was my job to deliver. As I drove to the location, a sense of unease settled in. It was a secluded area, far from the city's hustle and bustle. The GPS led me to a dead-end road surrounded by dense woods. There were no houses in sight, just towering trees and a narrow, winding path. My headlights cut through the darkness, casting eerie shadows that danced in the moonlight. I parked my car and checked the address again. It matched, but something felt off. I dialed the customer's number, and a deep, raspy voice answered. They confirmed this was the correct spot and asked me to walk down the path. Reluctantly, I grabbed the bag of food and followed the dimly lit trail. The air grew colder, and the rustling of leaves in the breeze was the only sound. As I walked further, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Finally, I reached a clearing, and there, under the pale moonlight, I saw an old, decrepit house. It looked abandoned for years, its windows shattered, and vines consuming its walls. This couldn't be right, I thought. Then, from the shadows emerged a figure, cloaked in darkness. They took the bag from my trembling hands and handed me an envelope. Without a word, they disappeared back into the night, leaving me with a chilling sense of dread. I opened the envelope to find a wad of cash, far more than the order's cost. Confused and unnerved, I hurried back to my car, my imagination running wild with what I had just experienced. I sped away from that eerie house, my mind racing with questions. What had just transpired? Who were those mysterious individuals? And why had they given me such an exorbitant amount of cash? As I continued driving through the isolated woods, the winding road seemed to stretch on forever. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being followed, my rearview mirror filled with nothing but darkness. Fear gnawed at my insides, and a chill crawled up my spine. Just when I thought I couldn't take it any longer, I reached the main road. The dense forest gave way to streetlights and familiar surroundings. I heaved a sigh of relief and checked my earnings for the night, which had significantly swelled thanks to that bizarre encounter. The days passed, and I couldn't stop thinking about that night. The house, the shadowy figure, and the unnerving silence of the woods haunted my thoughts. I tried to put it all behind me, chalking it up to an odd, one-time occurrence. But then, another DoorDash order came in, this time to the same location. I couldn't believe it. It had to be a mistake, I thought. But the address matched, and the payout was too tempting to pass up. Reluctantly, I found myself once again driving down that dark, winding path. The unease returned, and my heart raced. This time, as I reached the clearing, the house looked even more dilapidated, as though it had decayed further in just a few days. As I approached, a new figure emerged, not the same as the previous one. This one wore a tattered hooded cloak, and their eyes gleamed with an unnatural intensity. They took the food, handed me an envelope with even more cash, and disappeared into the night, just like before. This strange cycle repeated itself, each time with a different figure and a growing sense of dread. I couldn't resist the allure of the money, but with each delivery, the feeling of being lured into something sinister intensified. I knew I had to unravel the mystery behind these DoorDash orders, no matter how unsettling the truth might be. Something dark was at play, and I was unwillingly drawn deeper into its chilling embrace. My gig as a DoorDash driver was all about hustling to make ends meet while juggling the chaos of college life. It was a usual routine: grab orders from restaurants and whisk them off to customers' doorsteps, navigating the labyrinthine streets of the city. But on this particular evening, the routine took a spine-chilling detour into the unknown. The order I'd accepted pointed me toward a part of town I hadn't frequented before. I'd delivered to plenty of neighborhoods, each with its own quirks, but this one was different. There was an eerie vibe about it, an aura of unease that hung heavy in the air. The buildings looked weathered, the streets were eerily quiet, and the people seemed to carry an extra layer of caution. As I approached the delivery location, that feeling of dread inched up my spine. You know the one, that gut feeling that something's amiss, that prickling sense of danger. Still, I told myself it was just pre-delivery jitters and soldiered on. When I pulled up to the given address, the foreboding atmosphere only intensified. The building was far from inviting, with its peeling paint and flickering streetlights that did nothing to brighten the encroaching darkness. I paused before stepping out of my car, the engine's rumble suddenly sounding deafening in the silence. With a deep breath and a tinge of unease, I grabbed the restaurant's bag and ventured toward the front door. It was one of those moments where you knock, wait, and hope for the best. But the wait felt eternal, and dread settled like a rock in the pit of my stomach. Finally, the door creaked open, revealing a sight that sent shivers down my spine. A girl stood there, disheveled and weary, like she'd weathered a storm of troubles. Her eyes told stories of hardship and despair. She mumbled something about needing to fetch her boyfriend, the one who'd placed the order. As she turned to disappear into the depths of that dimly lit, eerie apartment, I couldn't help but glance inside, taking in the unsettling scene. The room looked like it had been ripped from a horror movie. Tattered curtains danced eerily in the faint draft, casting eerie shadows on cracked, peeling wallpaper. Stains marred the once bright carpet, and a rickety ceiling fan rotated lazily overhead, its monotonous creaking adding to the unnerving silence. The entire place seemed suspended in time, frozen in a macabre moment. Time seemed to crawl as I waited at the threshold, the room inside exuding a palpable creepiness. My instincts screamed at me to flee, to get out of there as fast as I could. Minutes stretched like hours before the guy, presumably the boyfriend, finally stepped into view. He wore a scowl that could curdle milk and wasted no time in berating me for being late, even though my timing was spot on. Just as my unease was about to reach its peak, he abruptly pulled out a menacing knife, the blade glinting ominously in the dim light. My heart raced as he threatened not to pay for the food, and then, without another word, he slammed the door shut. I knew I needed to make a hasty exit, that there was something profoundly unsettling about that place. So, with my heart racing and a sense of relief washing over me, I dashed back to my car. I peeled out of that neighborhood, leaving behind the unsettling apartment, and reported the eerie encounter to my boss. What became of that apartment and the people within it, I'll never know. But the unease, the lingering sense of dread, would remain with me long after that night had passed.